Hey, hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're all doing fine. I'm back with yet another retrospective. Yeah, it's high time. We left October behind us, so now it's time for me to do a retrospective of October of 1984. This is where I celebrate the wonderful year in music that was 1984. What was I listening to back then as a 13-year-old? Well, that's what I'm figuring out for these different episodes of Retrospective 1984. Growing up in Sweden, I was listening a lot to radio back then. That's how we got the information about new music. And that was through a radio program, a very popular one called Poporama. That one ended in the end of August, but then in September we got a new radio program called Tracks. And Tracks, that was basically the same as Poporama. They played a bunch of new singles each week, but Tracks was a bit more extended when it came to the list that they were doing. They had a top 20 where only Poporama had a top 6 or 5 or something like that. I don't know why. But this was a proper top 20 chart that we were in control of. After each program, every week, we could write in to Swedish radio to say these are my top 5 songs that you played this week, and that would be then counted for next week's track chart. So that's how it worked. And they had all some new things as well called bubblers, where they played some songs that didn't make it from last show but got enough votes to be bubblers that week. Well, I won't get into that at all. So what I'm going to go through in these episodes are the top 20 list from that respective month. And when I say respective month, it's not that I'm going to list every single week of October. No, what I'm focusing on is the last program that was transmitted for that respective month. So in October, it was the 27th of October, 1984, that I'm going to focus on. And if there are any gems that I think deserves a mentioning, that was songs or singles actually that were being played throughout October but didn't make it onto the 27th of October list. I'm going to do that after we've gone through this list. And also in each of these retrospectives I look through the UK charts to find some gems there as well that I think deserves mentioning, things that are near and dear to my heart, or was then at least. Things that were never being played on either Poporama or Tracks. So that's at the end of this episode. So now we have to look back on October of 1984. And to my help, as usual, I got my trusted 1984 notebook here. This is where I have all the lists written down for these retrospectives. So if you ever find me looking down here, it's because I have to read off the notes, because my old head won't contain all this information. So that's just it. But now, let's kick things off for this tracks list for on the 27th of October, 1984. And we'll start at the bottom in number 20, where we find a group called K-Ram. This one didn't ring any bells at all, and neither did the title of the single, A Ménage à Trois. Very risque title. Yeah, but it's not as exciting as you would think. I found this really bland, and there's probably a reason for why I can't remember ever listening to this one. It is first and foremost a blatant rip-off of Wham's Young Guns. And I also think in some places it might be a real rip-off of Wham's Wham rap as well. There are some segments in there. Now, I found this one just a cheap, not even a thrill. It was just cheap. And I won't go back to this one anytime soon, I'm sorry to say. If there's any K-Ram fans out there, you might have another opinion. Please put it down in the comments and make your plead for K-Ram and why this single is so great. But I doubt it, that there's anyone out there. Yeah, so that was the number 20 spot, and this one was somewhat successful in the track charts, surprisingly. 2 weeks it spent in the track chart with a peak positioning of number 17. So let's forget about K-Ram now and go to number 19. And here's a group that I'm at least familiar by name, XTC. A group that actually was formed, I read up on, not far from where I live today, in Sweden, of all places. And they've been going since the early 70s, and now in 1984 they were still going strong and released a new single called All You Pretty Girls. And I have to say, I'm not too well versed when it comes to XTC's music, but I actually really liked this song. There was something about it. It wasn't like the mainstream pop of 1984. No, they had their own style of music. But I think in this case I was more mesmerized with the video that accompanied this one, because when I do my research for these episodes, I go to YouTube and I seek out the videos, listen to the track, and at the same time enjoy the video. And in this case, it was a very lavish video, and I found it really compelling. And like I said, the song is good. It is. And as a package, it was really enjoyable, I have to say. So I might have to seek out some more XTC in the future and listen to them. Anyhow, this one was popular on the track charts in 1984. It spent 4 weeks and with a peak positioning of number 14. So yeah, the youngsters of 1984 loved this track. The next spot, the number 18th one, is something that I really, really loved back in 1984 and still do. I'm talking about Kim Wilde, and I have to pull this one from my collection now because it's proudly still in my collection. The Second Time. Was this the single that was called Go For It in America when they released it there? I think it was. This is European pressing, of course, so it's called The Second Time, as it should be. So it went, let's go for it. Let's go, for the second time, So there was a lot of go for it. So I understand why they were tempted to say, well, they won't remember. The listening public, if they ever heard this on radio and went out looking for it, they were looking for the title The Second Time. No, you got that record called Go For It. And I think back in the day, even we, my friends and I, we referred to this one as Go For It. Yeah, but it was called The Second Time here in Europe, at least. Yeah. Anyhow, a great track. This is my stepping stone into the wider world, the musical world of Kim Wilde, that is. This is where it all started, my love for Kim Wilde's music. What a wonderful combination of pop, Kim Wilde's wonderful, powerful voice as well. Yeah, from this time on, there was no stopping when it came to Kim Wilde. I seeked out everything I could lay my hands on, really, when it comes to Kim Wilde. And I think this one's it was the first one I bought, because I think it wasn't the album it's taken from, Teases and Dares, which is a great album, by the way. But I think I sought out that album after the fact. So I think I didn't have this one on 12-inch back then. I had it on a single, but nowadays upgraded to a 12-inch. And if you're curious, this has the extended version of it, of course. And on the B-side, Lovers on a Beach extended version as well. A great B-side. She usually had really great B-sides, Kim Wilde. And this is no exception at all. Love this one still today. The Second Time, or Go For It. Yeah. Kim Wilde. This was a new entry actually at this point in the 27th of October 1984 on the track chart. It managed to spend 3 weeks in total, and with a peak positioning of number 11, which is a shame, of course. It should have stayed even longer, but I'm sure it did on the selling charts in Sweden, because we have to remember this is the track chart, it's our chart, not the selling charts in Sweden. Okay, enough about that. I could talk even more about Kim Wilde, but I won't. We have to move on to number 17, and we have something that we got very familiar on here on these retrospectives, if you follow them before. This is Alphaville and Sounds Like a Melody. It's been on both Poporama and the track charts. It's been there for so long. It stayed for 8 weeks on tracks, and additional 4 weeks. That's 12 weeks in total, so 4 weeks in Poporama and 8 weeks in tracks, with a peak positioning of number 1. So yeah, we are very familiar with this one, if you've been following these retrospectives. Yeah. The next one in number 16, I talked about this one a couple of times as well on these retrospectives. It's Stevie Wonder, the wonderful Stevie Wonder, with the not so wonderful song, in my opinion, remember that, I Just Called to Say I Love You, a song that also spent 8 weeks on tracks, additional 1 week on Poporama, which makes a total of 9 weeks with a peak positioning of number 1 as well. Another really popular song from 1984, which I can't really stand. I couldn't back then, and I still can't really. I love Stevie Wonder, but this is a low point in my opinion. But I am probably one of the few that thinks that, because it was hugely popular. I think, did it actually win an Oscar as well, I read somewhere, for the best song taken from a movie or something like that? I think so. He's a great composer, Stevie Wonder, got a wonderful voice and all that, but I just called to say no. So let's move on. Number 15 on this track chart, we have Hall & Oates. Daryl Hall and John Oates with Out of Touch. This is a great one, and I also think this was the point in 1984 when I discovered that was something called Hall & Oates. With was that the same year as Man-Eater was released? I probably talked about that in the previous retrospective, but I forgot about it. It's got so muddled, because sometimes when I think back on songs, it was like, it must have been 1983, or it must have been 1984, or whatever. And then it turns out it was in 1987. There you go. The whole 80s is a big muddle. No, not really, but sometimes it could be. Out of Touch, anyhow. Great single from Hall & Oates. Like I said, this is probably where I discovered them. I didn't buy the single back then, but it ended up on some of my mixtapes back then. Not as popular on the track chart as you would think, because this is one of the songs that some may claim is an 80s classic today. Spent 2 weeks on the track chart with a peak positioning of number 15. So no, not that good. But this is one of the cases where I'm like, is that really correct? Where I have to double check and then triple check and all that. But yeah, it's true. We only spent 2 weeks on track charts. But once again, it's not the selling shots. Let's move on to number 14th, and another familiar entry if you've been following my retrospectives. This is a Swedish artist called Eva Dahlgren. Swedish singer-songwriter with a song called Guldgrävarsång. A gold digger song. And once again, she's not referring to what some people might say is gold digger today. No, this is a proper gold digger from back in the day. They digged for gold. Yeah, so a very mellow, very atmospheric song that I quite liked, but I've never been a huge fan of Eva Dahlgren, so she never ended up in my record collection at all. 6 weeks in the chart. It was hugely popular in Sweden. Eva Dahlgren is an icon, a musical icon in Sweden. So yeah, and even back then she established the fact I'm going to be an icon, and yeah, that's it. 6 weeks, like I said, in the track charts with the peak positioning of number 7. That was Eva Dahlgren. And in the next positioning, in number 13, we have a very familiar surname, I was going to say. This is Julian Lennon, the son of one of the sons of the late great John Lennon, of course. And I'm not sure, was this his debut single? I should actually have looked this up, but yeah, anyhow, this is Too Late for Goodbyes, and I do remember loving this one back in the day. And actually, I think it holds up really well today. His voice is very reminiscent of his father, and so is the composition as well. If John, rest his soul, would still be alive in 1984, I would gather this could be a song that he would have written. It's very, at least to me, it's very reminiscent of a John Lennon composition if he would be doing something in 1984. Yeah, really, really good. I love it. I love the melody in it. I love the voice. The lyrics are good. The production is good. All of it is really good. Held up really, really well. Brings a really big smile to my face every time I hear it. Really, really good. But surprisingly, it only spent 2 weeks on the track chart with a peak positioning of number 13. So once again, something I had to triple check just to make sure, because I remember this one was being really, really big, but not the selling chart, track chart. Yeah, let's move on to number 12, and there we have yet another Swedish act, this time around, Ratata. I talked about Ratata a couple of times here on my channel, and not only here in my retrospectives. I love this group, new wave synth pop group from Sweden. This time around they released a single called Jag behöver dig. I need you, roughly translated. Another pop gem from Ratata, taken from their excellent album called Paradise. Yeah, I love this one, and so did the Swedish listening public at the time, because it stayed 4 weeks on the track chart with a peak positioning of number 12. So if you're curious about Swedish synth pop of the time, I said this before, go and check out Ratata. Absolutely, really good. We now move on to number 11 on this track chart, and there we have a very familiar name. This is Kiss and Heaven's on Fire. I really remember this one. I couldn't stand Kiss back then. I talked about this one before in one of my really early episodes on this channel about the rivalry, I would say, between synths, which we call them, people who listen to synth music or electronic music, and the hard rockers, the heavy metal people. For some reason there was a clash between them because we listened to different kinds of music. And I couldn't stand heavy metal or hard rock back then, and Kiss was of course in that camp. But if you listen to Heaven's on Fire, it's really not much of hard rock or anything else. In my opinion, it's more like a pop track with some emphasis on guitars, some emphasis I would say. It's a catchy pop song, I have to admit, nothing that I would seek out to listen to today, but yeah, it's not as heavy and hard rocking as I thought back in the day, or even the hard rockers thought back then, because they thought that Kiss was really, really cool. They look like old aunts on some of these photos, and please don't come at me, because even if you're a Kiss fan, you must admit they look a bit ridiculous back then. And so did so many other groups back then, because it's the 80s, right? Yeah, so Kiss was no exception at all. Anyhow, I'll stop babbling about Kiss now. 8 weeks in the track chart. This one was hugely popular in Sweden, and with the peak positioning on number 4. Wow. But I do remember this one. It was huge. It was huge. Anyhow, let's move on. The number 10 spot on this track chart from the 27th of October did contain another Swedish act. This time around they were called Fake. Yeah, Fake. And the track is, or the single rather, is Memories of Pan. And this one, the title of a single, it sounded somewhat familiar, but I wasn't really sure. So of course I had to listen to it, and I was like, yeah, I have heard this one before. But it wasn't like this big aha moment where you're like, oh, it's that song. It was just like, yeah, there's something familiar to it. So I've heard it. Probably had it on a mixtape or something like that. A bit of a slow churning song, quite atmospheric, marching rhythm. Yeah, so really a slow, atmospheric song. But I was intrigued. I need to know more about Fake. Who were Fake? Because I couldn't really remember the group name. Didn't ring a bell. So I went out, and lo and behold, the singer of this band, her name is Ulrika Örn. And Ulrika Örn I'm familiar with because back in 1983 she starred in a hugely popular movie at the time called G. And I have the soundtrack here. G som i gemenskap. It was called in Swedish. And this soundtrack, a brilliant one by the way, it's got a lot of tracks from different groups active at the time in Sweden that became cult classics today. There's some really rare tracks on this one that only featured on this album. So it's a great one. And also something else, I have to retract something I said earlier on when I was talking about Eva Dahlgren. I said that I don't have Eva Dahlgren in my record collection. Well, listen, when I pulled this one out, I saw her picture here and I was like, oh yeah, she contributed with a couple of songs here. So I do have Eva Dahlgren in my collection. A couple of really good songs, actually, by her on this one. And a lot of others. But Ulrika Örn, or Fake, is not featured on this one at all. But she had one of the parts in this movie, and I think that's her over there, if I'm not mistaken. But anyhow, she was featured in a lot of pop magazines in Sweden at the time, mainly in 1983 and spilling over into 1984. She was really good looking. We all fell in love with her and all of that. But I had no clue that she was featured in a group or that she could actually sing. She doesn't have the greatest singing voice in the world, but it does fit with what Fake was doing, really. A bit of synth pop, perhaps new wave-ish kind of thing. But when I read the style of music they were doing, it said synth pop, of course, but it also said Italo disco. And I was like, well, what I heard from Memories of Pan, that wasn't really synth disco. Granted, the whole thing was produced in Italy, but that doesn't automatically make it an Italo disco track, right? Because it has to be danceable. The word disco is in it, right? Yeah, so I was a bit confused. So I went on to Discogs. And I saw that they released another record in 1984 called Frogs in Spain. Yeah, and that track, Frogs in Spain, is certainly could be categorized as Italo disco. It's produced in Italy, it's danceable. I would call it more synth pop, but the lines between what was synth pop and Italo disco is pretty blurred, because if it was produced in Italy and you could dance to it, basically it was Italo disco. Yeah, that's a rough categorization of it, but that's mainly how it worked. Yeah, I love myself Italo disco, by the way, but I'm not an authority when it comes to speaking of the history of it and all of that. I just love the music. But anyhow, yeah, that track, Frogs in Spain, it's really good synth track, and now I have to hunt that down. It needs to be part of my collection, because I will get that wonderful track Frogs in Spain, which is a wonderful title, by the way. And on the flip side, you will get Memories of Pan. Yes, that's how it works. And it was released through an Italian label at first, and then Syx Records in Germany picked it up. And Syx Records, they were releasing a lot of early Italo disco on their label, and yeah, they just continued throughout the 80s to release synth pop, Italo disco and all that. And they're still going strong today, doing a lot of re-releases of these records. But I haven't seen Fake yet, but I might just have missed it. I need to do some more research and hunt a copy of that record down, even if it's just a reissue. Just a reissue, I say. Yeah, never mind. You know what I mean. Yeah, so great to get familiar with this one. One of the tracks that over time got lost to me, but now I grabbed it again and implanted it into my brain, and I'm really happy about that happening. I will stop now. I will just finish off by saying this stayed for 5 weeks on the Swedish chart, so it was really popular, and the peak positioning was number 9 for Fake and Memories of Pan. But now let's move on to number 9 on this track chart. We have a very familiar voice and entry. I talked about this one before. This is George Michael and Careless Whisper, of course. Huge 80s classic today, and it was really huge back then as well. Lovely song. I think it still holds up really well. And when I last talked about this one, I think I said that George penned this one. But I have to correct that and say Andrew Ridgeley, the other part of Wham, actually co-wrote this one with George Michael as well. And that just brings a lot of questions. Why didn't they release it just as a Wham record? Because Wham were at the heights here in 1984. But who knows? It was just the right time for George to go out with this one as a solo single. Perhaps they didn't think it fitted the Wham formula, so to speak. But any less, a great song. A song that they actually performed live with Wham years and years before this one was released in 1984. And I think I said that as well in my previous one. But anyhow, 15 weeks in total on the charts, and I say charts because we have 13 weeks on the track charts here, which is ridiculously good. Additional 2 weeks on Poporama before that one ended, with the peak positioning of number 3. Yet another one you would think would end up in number 1 at some point, but never really did on tracks of Poporama. Peak position at number 3. Great song. And the next one in number 8 we also talked about, my love for Depeche Mode. This is Master and Servant, of course. A great single from Some Great Reward, the album they released this year as well. 10 weeks on the track chart with a peak positioning of number 1. Hugely popular. They've always been really popular in Sweden, Depeche Mode, and I think this is where I wouldn't say it culminated, but where it actually grew even bigger, the fan base of Depeche Mode. That album, Some Great Reward, was hugely popular in Sweden. But yeah, I already talked about them in earlier retrospective, so let's go to number 7 on this track chart, and we got Numero Uno, a group that I am familiar with today, but I'm not sure that I remember them from back in the day. This is a single called Tora Tora Tora. And my love for Italo disco and things like that, you will say, oh, this sounds like it's Italo disco and something right down my alley. But it's really not that good. It didn't really stick to me today. Sometimes when you listen back to some of these dance tracks from the mid 80s or early 80s, you get stuck with that cheese factor. It's so cheesy and ridiculous, really, that you can't help by falling in love with it. But it's not the case with Numero Uno, in my opinion, with Tora Tora Tora. No. So we'll leave it there. It spent 5 weeks actually, so it's actually really popular on the track chart for some reason. 5 weeks there, and with the peak positioning on number 6. So yeah, there you go. And then in number 6 on this track chart, welcome Wham! With Freedom. They released yet another single from Make It Big, the big album they released also in 1984. This is another hugely popular track, Freedom. Spent 6 weeks in the track chart with peak positioning on number 4. Yeah, a lot of groups had their year in 1984, but one of the really big ones, or the big one, was Wham, of course. So many hit singles in a row, and we haven't seen the end of it yet, promise you. So I don't have much to say about Freedom, really. I think it's a decent Wham song, and I think I spoke about this one before. I only have like 3 records with Wham in my collection, and one of those is a compilation they released. Was that last year? Yeah. Just for me to get some of the singles that I really enjoyed. It's a good way if you somewhat like an artist or a group. A greatest hits is a good way to go then, because you get the greatest hits. Yeah. I'll stop babbling now. Number 5 on this track chart is Culture Club, another huge act from the 1980s, I have to say, not only 1984, but it was another popular year for Culture Club as well. The War Song is this one, and I was really into Culture Club. It must have been 1983 or early 1984 when Color by Numbers came out with, you know, Karma Chameleon and It's a Miracle. I talked about them here on my retrospectives before. I love those ones. And then they released a new album, which this War Song was taken from. I wasn't that enamored with that one. I had a really good friend who bought this one, so that's usually how things worked. If I didn't buy it, some of my friends probably had it, so I could tape it off them and they could tape something off me that they didn't have, because we had limited amounts of money, right? So we couldn't buy everything. So this was the case with this one, and I was really glad I didn't invest money on this one. I bought something else that I probably found much better, because it's not as strong as of an album as Color by Numbers in my book. And even today, listening back to it, I tend to agree with my 13-year-old self in 1984. The War Song is good. But yeah, let's just park it there. 5 weeks on the track chart, so it was popular on tracks with a peak positioning on number 1. Really popular, right? Yeah, Culture Club was the thing in 1984 for a lot of people. In the number 4 spot, we have Prince and Purple Rain, or Prince and the Revolution to be more exact. Yeah, yet another classic track today, and it was huge back then. This is where probably I would say I discovered Prince, because I can't remember if I heard 1999 before this one or after the fact, but it doesn't matter. This is the place where I discovered Prince, and I wasn't alone in that. A lot of people discovered Prince through Purple Rain, which, by the way, the one I'm holding in my hand is the soundtrack. It's taken from the motion picture of the same name, Purple Rain. Never saw that one when it came out. I saw that years after the fact. I wasn't too keen on that. But I am keen on this album. A great one. Not a single bad track on it. The track in question here is, of course, the title track, Purple Rain, which is a great slow song and a long song if you listen to the album version, and even longer if you listen to some of the live versions he made as well. I think, yeah, anyhow. This is the album I picked up in 1984. It's got a bit of wear and tear, and I think it's high time for me to seek out another copy, but it's got quite a lot of nostalgia around this one, so that's why I kept it. So you can see there's a tear down here as well. You've got a bit of a price sticker still on it here, and so forth and so on. And it wraps around here as well, or the seal to it. But yeah, love this one. Really good album. And Purple Rain, because that is the track we're talking about here, which was on the track chart. What can I say that hasn't already been said about Purple Rain? Love it. Even if it's a bit overplayed, it's one of those songs that I can still enjoy when it comes on, or when I put it on. It spent 5 weeks on the track chart with a peak positioning on number 2. So yet another one where I had to check everything, triple check it and things like that, because when you think back on some tracks, like I said before, you think that they were so huge, they must have spent 20 weeks on the charts. But that's not really the case, because once again, it's not the selling charts. And there were so many singles being released every month, so there was a big competition for them to stay on the different charts. But it did sell really well, so I'm sure it stayed more than 5 weeks on the selling charts in Sweden. And now on to the number 3 spot on this track chart. Paul McCartney and No More Lonely Nights. Yes, this is yet another case where I discovered someone through a record in 1984. The greatness of Paul McCartney as a solo artist, this is the point where I realized that. Loved this one. Initially I had it only on a 7-inch, but I listened to it so much. I just love this one, and I think it's still holds up really well to today. Taken from yet another soundtrack. It was a lot of soundtracks on the lists or the charts in 1984. This is from Give My Regards to Broad Street, a film I believe that both Paul produced and starred in as well. Never seen that movie, but shortly after getting this single in 1984, I actually bought the album as well. And I think, contrary to many other McCartney or Beatles fans out there, whatever, I think Give My Regards to Broad Street is a good album. It is. And of course, No More Lonely Nights is a standout track from that one. And this is a 12-inch that I picked up years later. It does contain the extended version of it. It's got silly love songs as well. He's a re-rendering, I would say, of the Wings song from back in the 70s. And I know a lot of people don't like this interpretation of silly love songs, but I love it. And you also get No More Lonely Nights, Ballad on this one. And I think Ballad was the one that was the single version that I was listening to. Yeah. But anyhow, a great one from Paul McCartney. Yeah. I could talk even more about that one, but we have to move on. This was the number 3 spot, and I have to say it stayed for 7 weeks. Hugely popular with the peak positioning of number 3. So this was the peak positioning on the 27th of October, 1984. The number 2 position on this track chart is another one that I talked about last time. This is Limahl and Never Ending Story. Another great pop track from back in the day, considered today being one of the big 80s classics, of course. And it's well deserved of that epithet because it is a great pop song. I love the voice. I love the production of it. I particularly love, and I remember back in the day, was because it was so unusual. The track actually fades in. That's what I remember from hearing the single. I didn't buy the single back then, but my sister did, and we listened to it quite a lot. And I was so fascinated by how it faded in the beginning. It didn't like just start. It was like, it's been going on for a while, so let's fade it in here. And then he started singing. That's just one of the many brilliant things about this single with Limahl. But like I said, I already talked about him in my previous retrospective, so if you want to hear me babble more about some of these artists that I already mentioned, go back and listen to my previous retrospectives. Stayed for 10 weeks on the track chart and with a peak positioning of number 2, so this is also where this one peaked. Really good one. And in the number 1 spot on this track list is a new entry from Alphaville, Forever Young. Like I said in so many of these retrospectives, we already mentioned Alphaville here earlier in this episode, but this was the 3rd single, I believe, from the album that was also going to be called Forever Young. This was the title track, and a huge one for them. 11 weeks on the track chart with a peak positioning, of course, of number 1. This was played everywhere. This might have also been among so many other the big ballad year as well. We had a lot of really slick ballads like Careless Whisper, and then we had Forever Young here, and we could call No More Lonely Nights a ballad as well, of course, and it's a lot of slow songs. Purple Rain, of course, as well. Yeah, so a huge year for the ballads. That's what I wanted to say. Just couldn't find the words there. Yeah, Alphaville, it was certainly their year, 1984. A lot of hit singles and a hugely successful album as well. Don't have this one in my collection. I already stated this fact before. I found, shortly after talking about Big in Japan, that 12-inch in a second-hand shop here in Reading. So I picked that one up, but I still haven't found the Forever Young album or any of the other singles from that album. But I'm looking. I'm keeping my eye out because I need them in my collection. They're still really good today, really good pop music. That's it. That's the top 20 tracks being played on the Swedish radio program Tracks on the 27th of October 1984. But in each of these retrospectives, I also look back on previous shows on those respective months. Just to see if there was any new singles that were being played, but didn't really reach that mark, which we are focusing on today, for example, the 27th of October. Gems that deserve mentioning and hold a special place in my heart and all of that. And I found 2 singles from tracks in the month of October that I feel we should talk more about. First one being Bronski Beat's Why. And I talked about Bronski Beat here before, especially the great album they released also in 1984 called The Age of Consent. And Why is probably, to me at least, the standout single from that album. It's such a great one, and hybrid between brilliant synth pop and high energy disco, with a great message to it, and a very important message. But that message to me in 1984 flew right over my head. It wasn't until a friend of mine pointed out, what is he singing there? I turned to kiss his lips. And that's where the speculations got going about, are they homosexuals? Or, it was all, we weren't that informed at that point in time. And and it's no excuse, but we were 13. And the way people looked on homosexuality back then was, I have to say, appalling. And it hasn't gotten better today in some cases, I'm sad to say. But anyhow, the message on this one is really good. But I remember just shortly after hearing this one, probably on tracks, seeing the video on Swedish television, and I was mesmerized by it. It's the members of Bronski Beat. At some point they go shopping in this futuristic shopping mall that was placed on some rigging. People frantically putting products in the trolleys. I think they had roller skates on as well. And then on top of this supermarket thing, they had God himself looking down on the public and judging them, it seemed. And then on the bottom, you had hardworking people there. It was like heaven and hell and something in between. Yeah. I think I got some of that symbolism at the time, but like I said, most of the messaging just went over my head. And then you started hearing all these slurs about Bronski Beat in my school, and a lot of other bands as well. I got really into Frank Goes to Hollywood at the time in 1984, and you heard all of those slurs around them as well. And I won't repeat any of that today, but it didn't deter me at all from listening to this music at all. And it shouldn't really, but at the time you could be very I don't listen to that, but I proudly stood my ground. I thought it was great music. When it both come to Bronski Beat or Frank Goes to Hollywood or whatever it might have been, they put slurs at our direction. But yeah, so over the years, of course, I grow more conscious about the topics and the importance of the lyrics of the different songs, and Bronski Beat's Why is one of them. And at the time, if I got this one on a single, which I didn't, this is a copy that I got years and years later, but if at the time I picked up this specific 12-inch, I would have seen the lyrics to the song as well here on the back, and I might have understood more about it, and yeah, but I didn't. Great one, but sadly it only stayed for 2 weeks on the track chart with the peak positioning of number 17. So a bit sad about that one, but it didn't reach all the way there. I could talk more about Bronski Beat and all that, but I have to move on. The second one, the second honorable mention, as we can call it, from this track charts of October 1984 is The Glamorous Life with Sheila E. A great pop song by the great percussionist, the singer, associated a lot with Prince at the time. Released her, I believe it was her first solo outing, and what a great one. I loved this one when I heard it, and I remember at the time I went out looking for the single, but for some reason I couldn't find it in my local record shops, and still today I don't have it in my collection, which is a shame. I've been keeping my eyes out for it every time I go out do my vintage shopping in secondhand stores and things like that. Never come across it. Not the 12-inch and not the album, which I believe was called Glamorous Life as well, because there are some really good tracks on it. I think the second single she released was the Bells of Saint Mark or something like that. It was a good one as well. But the Glamorous Life, that track, really good. Penned by Prince, I think, and I think both Sheila E and Prince co-produced this track as well, and it's It's a great one. I remember hearing the 12-inch version at some point, I think on a radio program as well back in the day, and it was a long one, and I looked it up now and it's nearly 7 minutes long, and I do remember being blown away by it. So I really keep my fingers crossed coming across a copy of that one. Glamorous Life with Sheila E. Only 1 week in the track, so it was only played once as a new entry, sadly. We now come to the last segment of this retrospective, and like I usually do on these retrospectives, I have a look at the UK chart of that particular month, and that means of course October 1984 in this case. I'm looking for singles that are near and dear to me, honorable mentions if you want, but most importantly these are singles that were never featured on tracks, and I found a couple of gems for October 1984. Starting out with this one, this is the Style Council and Shout to the Top. And boy oh boy, I don't know really where to start with this one. Let's start with 1984. I had no clue who the Style Council was back in 1984. It took me a couple of years before I catched on to the Style Council, but when I did, I fell in love straight away. They were labeled as, I think at the time, sophistopop. I think it's probably a journalist who came up with that category, but it was lumped into that crowd. Sophistopop, it was called. More jazzy influences, soul, yeah, those kind of things. More sophisticated pop, yeah. Silly, I know, but think bands like Sade, later on Swing Out Sister, and I think the Blow Monkeys as well was in that category, and so forth and so on. And Style Council was probably the crown of it all, in my opinion. Yeah, wonderful music. The band was formed by Paul Weller of The Jam, and there is not a trace of The Jam in this one. Well, there is Paul Weller, of course, but the music is so different from what The Jam did. He went for, like I said, the more jazzier approach, mixed up with some pop and some soul, and it just comes together as a perfect mix of music. So besides Paul Weller, we also had Mike Talbot on keys, Steve White on drums, and the wonderful D.C. Lee on vocals together with Paul Weller. Just a wonderful constellation, this one, the Style Council. And the aesthetics as well. This copy, by the way, this 12-inch of Shout to the Top, I just picked up a month or so ago. And even if I had all the tracks that are included on this one, I would still buy this one just because of the cover. You could just frame it. It's such a lovely cover here with the girl in the yellow shirt. And the color tone as well of it. It is very reminiscent of the film stock used in the 60s, early 70s, right? And that was, of course, the style they were going with, not only with the music, with the cover arts as well. And if we turn it over, yes, this could easily be mistaken for an older record, something released perhaps in the 60s. Who knows? But it is from 1984. But I just love the style of it. But most importantly is, of course, the music. If it comes with a nice cover, that's just a bonus, right? So we got Shout to the Top here, the original version, and then we got the instrumental version as well. And then on the B-side, we have a couple of gems of songs here. The Piccadilly Trail, and the last one, The Ghost of Dachau, or just Ghosts of Dachau. Wonderful track. The Ghost of Dachau, I didn't have that track since before. I have a lot of other Style Council records in my collection, but that one was sorely missing. And it's just a lovely single. Shout to the Top. If I were to introduce someone to the Style Council, that would probably be the first track that I would play to them. It's a very uplifting, great, soul-inspired pop song, really. That's the best way I can best way I can describe that song, and Style Council as well. Yeah, absolutely great. This one was on the UK single charts for 10 weeks, peaked at number 7, so I'm really glad to hear that. But in Sweden, they were sorely missing from the tracks chart, so that's why I'm mentioning him here. Mentioning, that was some Swinglish for you for this episode. The next one out that I found on the UK single charts is a bit of an odd one, because I had to check this one not only twice but 3 times because I didn't believe my eyes. I'm talking about Sade. I already mentioned her when we talked about Sophistopop, and the single Smooth Operator. Yes, I know I'm holding Diamond Life here in my hand, but this was a debut album they released and Smooth Operator is included on it, so I don't have the single. But this one has to do. Yeah, the reason I had to check this so many times is because I remember it being a big track. It was played a lot on radio in 1984. But it turns out it was probably not released until 1985 on single in Sweden. And that's why it's missing from any of the track charts in 1984. So, fair enough, I thought. I'm going to bring it up here because I'm not going to do another one of these retrospectives for 1985 next year. I have so many other things I want to do specials on and so forth and so on here on my channel. So I'll save you that one. But yeah, so Sade's Smooth Operator. I'm sure you all who are listening to this one is familiar with that song. She probably blew the whole musical scene away when they released this album. And I said it's Sade Adu, of course, but I think Sade in this case was the name of the group itself. I think as time went along, it became more or less just Sade Adu. But she's more known as just Sade, right? But at this point, it was a group that was called Sade. Yeah, 10 weeks in the charts, just like the Style Council. This one peaked at number 19, and it was released as a single in the UK in 1984, so that's why I'm bringing it up. But wow, what a great one. And if you haven't checked out this album, do it. It's a classic nowadays, of course. Got Smooth Operator on it, Your Love is King, Why Can't We Live Together as well. It's a ton of good tracks on this one. Highly, highly recommended. And to round things off, I'm going to talk about an artist that I talked quite a lot about here on my channel, Tracey Ullman and Helpless. Yes, this is a track taken from her second album that was released also in 1984, You Caught Me Out. In Sweden, she had a couple of hits in late 1983, beginning of 1984, mostly taken from her first album, or taken from her first album, I would say, because the second one wasn't out at that point. The first album was called You Broke My Heart in 17 Places. Just a great, great album. And if you haven't heard me rant about Tracey Ullman before, she's an actress from the UK that started a singing career in 1983 with Stiff Records. And what she did, she did a lot of covers. She recorded a lot of covers of older songs, some newer ones as well, most notably Kirsty MacColl singles. And Kirsty MacColl did collaborate quite a lot with Tracey Ullman on her records, being a background singer and who knows what. Yeah, so a lot of support there from Kirsty MacColl. So the style of music, think girl groups from the 60s, you know, like the Supremes or anything like that. That was her forte. So she took that style and made it her own, and everything was of course updated with an 80s production and all of that. And Helpless is no exception at all. A great track, like I said, taken from a second album, and one of the standout tracks from that one, along with Sunglasses, which I already talked about in a previous retrospective. But at the time, I thought this one was actually not a cover. I thought it was penned especially for Tracey Ullman. Years and years later, it dawned on me it was actually a cover. It's been covered by quite a lot of artists throughout the years, but I think one of the first ones, if not the first one, I'm not really sure, was the Four Tops. And they did this one. So yeah, yet another cover. But the rendition, the Tracey Ullman rendition of Helpless is just great. And also, at the time in 1984, I had no clue that this one was released as a single. I think it was a year after, in 1985, when I found this one in a local record shop, and I was like, wow, did they release this one from the album as a single? I had no clue. So I picked it up straight away. So this is the original I'm holding in my hand from back in the day. And of course, it's an extended version as well, a good one. And on the B-side, we have Falling In and Out of Love. And I tried to do some research on this one as well before this episode, because I always loved this one, but I never thought about it as being a cover, just like I did with Helpless, but it turned out to be a cover. But this one, I can't really find any evidence of it being in a cover. And if you look at the songwriters for this one, it seems like they were more contemporary songwriters at the time. So, yeah, I would say this is penned for Tracey Ullman. I might be wrong, so if you do know any different, put it down in the comments, please. But a lovely, lovely one. And we also get an instrumental of Helpless, of course. And sadly, this was one of the last releases from Tracey Ullman as a recording artist. And if not the last, I'm not really sure. I don't think she released anything in 1985. But once again, I should have looked that up. But anyhow, sad that she didn't carry on. This one did just spend 3 weeks in the UK single charts, peaked at number 61, so it wasn't hugely popular. I think with that kind of style of music she was doing, flirting a lot with the 60s girls bands and all of that, it has a very short time span when people are a bit amused by it and love it. But I never got tired of it. She should have done a third album or fourth album. Yeah, just kept going. But she had an acting career as well to take care of, I think so. But what a great job she did. I love it. I highly recommend you take a listen to any Tracey Ullman record, really. But Helpless is one of the outstanding ones, with a great harmonica solo in it as well. Really, really good. And I love the cover design of this one as well, with that moody look she's got there. Is she helpless on this one, this black and white photo? And when we turn it over, it looks more like she's hopeless. But yeah, great one. Once again, she stick to Stiff Records all the way through. She was signed to that label. Yeah, I could talk for hours about Tracey Ullman, but I won't. Because it's time to round things off for this retrospective of October of 1984. I thank you all for sticking along with yet another retrospective here with me. And if you do have any comments, like your favorite tracks of 1984 or just music chat in general, put it down in the comments. That would be great. And a huge thank you to all my subscribers and all of you people who does comment from time to time here on my channel and giving me the thumbs up and all that. Really encourage me to go on with this channel, because I love talking about music, if you haven't noticed. Yeah. Anyhow, until next time, I hope you all take care of yourself, and as usual, I bid you adieu.